Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bride on Buddhism. This week we will be reading and discussing the Soma Thera translation of the Kālāma Sutta in its entirety. The name of the sutta refers to the clan to which the Buddha is giving the sutta. The Kālāma clan resided in the village of Kesaputtiya, now called Kesaputtiya, so the sutta is sometimes referred to as the Kesamutta Sutta. It is Sutta 65 in the Anuttara Nikaya, and it is fairly well known in the West as the Buddha's quote-unquote charter of free inquiry. The premise of the text is that the Kālāmas ask the Buddha how they ought to evaluate the claims of the many ascetics and religious thinkers that pass through their village. The Buddha then lays out the conditions upon which all of their claims must be evaluated and discerned. We hope you enjoy. I heard thus. Once the Blessed One, while wandering in the Kosala country with a large community of bhikkhus, entered a town of the Kālāma people called Kesaputtiya. The Kālāmas, who were inhabitants of Kesaputtiya, said, Reverend Gautama, the monk, the son of the Shakyas, has, while wandering in the Kosala country, entered Kesaputtiya. The good repute of the Reverend Gautama has been spread in this way. Indeed, the Blessed One is thus consummate, fully enlightened, endowed with knowledge and practice, sublime, knower of the worlds, peerless, guide of the tameable men, teacher of divine and human beings, which he by himself has through direct knowledge understood clearly. He set forth the Dharma, good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, possessed of meaning and the letter, and complete in everything, and he proclaims the holy life that is perfectly pure. Seeing such consummate ones is good indeed. Then the Kālāmas, who were inhabitants of Kesaputtiya, went to where the Blessed One was. On arriving there, some paid homage to him and sat down on one side. Some exchanged greetings with him, and after the ending of cordial, memorable talk, sat down on one side. Some saluted him, raising their joined palms, and sat down on one side. Some announced their name and family, and sat down on one side. Some, without speaking, sat down on one side. The Kālāmas, who were inhabitants of Kesaputtiya, sitting on one side, said to the Blessed One, There are some monks and Brahmins, Venerable Sir, who visit Kesaputtiya. They expound and explain only their own doctrines. The doctrines of others they despise, revile, and pull to pieces. Some other monks and Brahmins too, Venerable Sir, come to Kesaputtiya. They also expound and explain only their own doctrines. The doctrines of others they despise, revile, and pull to pieces. Venerable Sir, there is doubt, there is uncertainty in us concerning them. Which of these reverend monks and Brahmins spoke the truth, and which falsehood? It is proper for you, Kālāmas, no doubt, to be uncertain. Uncertainty has arisen in you about what is doubtful. Come, Kālāmas, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration the monk is our teacher. Kālāmas, when you yourselves know these things are bad, these things are blamable, these things are censured by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to harm and ill, abandon them. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does greed appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being given to greed, and being overwhelmed and vanquished mentally by greed, this man takes life, steals, commits adultery, and tells lies. He prompts another, too, to do likewise. Will that be long for his harm and ill? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does hate appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being given to hate, and being overwhelmed and vanquished mentally by hate, this man takes life, steals, commits adultery, and tells lies. He prompts another, too, to do likewise. Will that be long for his harm and ill? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does delusion appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being given to delusion and being overwhelmed and vanquished mentally by delusion, This man takes life, steals, commits adultery, and tells lies. He prompts another too to do likewise. Will that be long for his harm and ill? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Are these things good or bad? Bad, Venerable Sir. Blamable or not blamable? Blamable, Venerable Sir. Censured or praised by the wise? Censured, Venerable Sir. Undertaken and observed, do these things lead to harm and ill or not? Or how does it strike you? Undertaken and observed, these things lead to harm and ill. Thus it strikes us here. Therefore did we say, Kālāmas, what was said thus. Come, Kālāmas, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias toward a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration, the monk is our teacher. Kālāmas, when you yourselves know, these things are bad, these things are blamable, these things are censured by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to harm and ill, abandon them. Come, Kālāmas, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias toward a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration, the monk is our teacher. Kālāmas, when you yourselves know, these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness. Enter on and abide in them. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does absence of greed appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his benefit, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being not given to greed, and not overwhelmed and not vanquished mentally by greed, this man does not take life, does not steal, does not commit adultery, and does not tell lies. He prompts another too to do likewise. Will that be long for his benefit and happiness? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does absence of hate appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his benefit, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being not given to hate, and being not overwhelmed and not vanquished mentally by hate, this man does not take life, does not steal, does not commit adultery, and does not tell lies. He prompts another too to do likewise. Will that be long for his benefit and happiness? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Does absence of delusion appear in a man for his benefit or harm? For his benefit, Venerable Sir. Kālāmas, being not given to delusion, and being not overwhelmed and not vanquished mentally by delusion, this man does not take life, does not steal, does not commit adultery, and does not tell lies. He prompts another too to do likewise. Will that be long for his benefit and happiness? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kālāmas? Are these things good or bad? Good, Venerable Sir. Blamable or not blamable? Not blamable, Venerable Sir. Censured or praised by the wise? Praised, Venerable Sir. Undertaken and observed, do these things lead to benefit and happiness or not? Or how does it strike you? Undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness. Thus it strikes us here. Therefore did we say, Kālāmas, what was said thus. Come, Kālāmas, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration, the monk is our teacher. Kālāmas, when you yourselves know, these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness. Enter on and abide in them. The disciple of the noble ones, Kālāmas, who in this way is devoid of coveting, devoid of ill will, undiluted, clearly comprehending and mindful, dwells, having pervaded, with the thought of amity, one quarter, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above, below, and across he dwells, having pervaded, because of the existence in it of all living beings, everywhere the entire world, with the great exalted boundless light of amity, that is free of hate or malice. He lives having pervaded with the thought of compassion 1 quarter, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, and across, he dwells having pervaded because of the existence in it of all living beings everywhere, the entire world, with the great exalted boundless thought of compassion that is free of hate or malice. He lives having pervaded with the thought of gladness 1 quarter, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, and across, he dwells having pervaded because of the existence in it of all living beings everywhere, the entire world, with the great, exalted, boundless thought of gladness that is free of hate or malice. He lives having pervaded with the thought of equanimity 1 quarter, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, and across, he dwells having pervaded because of the existence in it of all living beings everywhere, the entire world, with the great, exalted, boundless thought of equanimity that is free of hate or malice. The disciple of the noble ones, Kālāmas, who has such a hate-free mind, such a malice-free mind, such an undefiled mind, and such a purified mind, is one by whom 4 solaces are found here and now. Suppose there is a hereafter, and there is a fruit, a result, of deeds done well or ill. Then it is possible that at the dissolution of the body after death, I shall arise in the heavenly world, which is possessed of the state of bliss. This is the first solace found by him. Suppose there is no hereafter, and there is no fruit, no result, of deeds done well or ill. Yet in this world here and now, free from hatred, free from malice, safe and sound and happy, I keep myself. This is the second solace found by him. Suppose evil results befall an evildoer. I, however, think of doing evil to no one. Then how can ill results affect me, who does no evil deed? This is the third solace found by him. Suppose evil results do not befall an evildoer. Then I see myself purified in any case. This is the fourth solace found by him. The disciple of the noble ones, Kālāmas, who has such a hate-free mind, such a malice-free mind, such an undefiled mind, and such a purified mind, is one by whom here and now these 4 solaces are found. So it is, Blessed One, so it is, Sublime One. The disciple of the noble ones, Venerable Sir, who has such a hate-free mind, such a malice-free mind, such an undefiled mind, and such a purified mind, is one by whom here and now 4 solaces are found. Suppose there is a hereafter, and there is a fruit, a result, of deeds done well or ill. Then it is possible that at the dissolution of the body after death, I shall arise in the heavenly world, which is possessed of the state of bliss. This is the first solace found by him. Suppose there is no hereafter, and there is no fruit, no result, of deeds done well or ill. Yet in this world here and now, free from hatred, free from malice, safe and sound and happy, I keep myself. This is the second solace found by him. Suppose evil results befall an evildoer. I, however, think of doing evil to no one. Then how can ill results affect me, who does no evil deed? This is the third solace found by him. Suppose evil results do not befall an evildoer. Then I see myself purified in any case. This is the fourth solace found by him. The disciple of the noble ones, Venerable Sir, who has such a hate-free mind, such a malice-free mind,
Kālāma Sutta.
such an undefiled mind,
Docs, what did you think?
and such a purified
I
mind,
liked this one
is
quite
one
a
by
bit.
whom here and now
It's
these 4 solaces
short
are
enough
found.
to be digestible.
Marvelous,
it still
Venerable
has
Sir.
the
Marvelous, Venerable
repetitive
Sir.
structure.
As if, Venerable
that
Sir, a person were to
suttas
turn
have,
face
so
upwards
it's
what is upside
still
down,
the right
or to
flavor,
uncover the concealed,
and
or to
it
point the way to
does
one who is
a
lost,
lot
or to carry a
in
lamp
that
in the
space
darkness,
to
thinking,
clarify
those who
how
have eyes
Buddhists
will see
should
visible
approach
objects.
the
So has the
texts
Dharma
and
been set forth
information
in many
general.
ways by the Blessed One.
Normally, when we're deciding
We, Venerable
sutra
Sir,
episodes,
go to the Blessed One
I
for
let
refuge,
Nick
to the
recommend a
Dharma for
couple
refuge,
and
to the
choose from
Sangha
those.
for
This
refuge.
is one where I
Venerable
actually
Sir, may
requested
the Blessed
we do
One
this
regard
one.
us as
I
lay
lurk in a few
followers
Buddhist
who have
spaces
gone for
online.
refuge for
The
life
sutta
from today.
came up in discussion, and
Thus
it was
concludes the
fairly
Kālāma
short,
Sutta.
so I just read it. I originally read the Bhikkhu Sujato translation, which is pretty significantly different. It still says the same basic message, but it has a lot of details that are differently translated in a way that would change this discussion. for the discussion's sake, we're going to stick mostly to the translation that you just listened to. So let's get into the details here. So let's talk about the rejection criteria for a minute. So after I read the sutta, I came back to that segment of the text with dictionary.com up for me so I could nail down exact meanings of the words used here. And that does matter quite a bit. These are precise instructions, it seems like.
They definitely are, yeah. And like you were saying before, it is speaking to the criteria for rejecting any arguments, any information that you hear. So it's not just what the sages and what the ascetics say when they pass through your village and when they make what we in the modern day would think of as religious claims. It's just anything that you hear from anybody about anything. And so I found this very interesting as well, seeing how the Buddha is describing how we ought to evaluate anybody's claims, anybody's arguments, anything that they say to us.
And broadly, I agree with his assessment. So let's go through what the criteria are. So the quote starts with, "Do not go upon what has been acquired by," and then let's just talk about each criteria. So repeated hearing. Hearing a thing often doesn't make it more or less true, so that makes sense. It's not a matter of just hearing it over and over again. Okay, that's the case.
You can say gravity doesn't exist all day long, but you're still going to be pulled down to the earth. And saying that gravity doesn't exist over and over again doesn't make it true.
Correct. So next, nor upon tradition. This is another one that I agree with pretty strongly. Tradition isn't necessarily a bad thing, but assigning it too much power is not a good way to go about things. And traditions can also just be wrong or based on bad information. So tradition is not enough to qualify something as being true or useful information.
That's right. And I agree. Tradition, if I were to define it, I would think of it as we've taken something that people used to do in a particular context for a particular reason, and we have continued to do it in spite of the reasons and context changing around the thing. And that's where things become tricky. On the one hand, it's preserving the thing that we used to do, and it's preserving memory and information about the context and reasons we used to do it. But then on the other hand, it's also, to a certain extent, imposing a sort of rigidity and preventing a certain amount of change or adaptation in a new context and in a new world. And just like that, I also think that tradition should not prevent its own change and should not discourage or entirely inhibit adaptations and for new growth in a practice among a person or community or anything like that. So I also think that just because this is how we have done it, that means we should always do it this way, or we should not adopt this new way of thinking or take this new information to be true or untrue.
Yeah, tradition is not necessarily a bad thing at all, but it becomes a problem when an old tradition prevents people from responding to a new context.
Exactly.
So the next one, nor upon rumor. And that's a pretty easy one. Rumors are interesting, but they are never reliable. That's just not a good way to determine the truth of something.
Yeah, this one actually kind of seems very similar to me as to the repeated hearing one.
Yeah.
Don't go upon what you've heard, whether someone has said it 100 million times or whether they're passing on a rumor to you, kind of sounds the same.
Next one, nor upon what is in a scripture. So I agree with this point, but it's also really interesting to see it being made in a scripture. On a surface level, I could see this being argued to contradict other suttas that describe their own importance within the text. But I think there's room to negate something like that by saying this sutta isn't true because it's scripture because it's true, or the fact that it's in a scripture isn't what makes it important. It's what the scripture says that makes it important. That kind of way for folks who are true believers, including believers of a sutta's claim to be important, to get around that. Like, the scripture part of it isn't the important part, I think they might say.
Yeah, definitely. And another point to draw our attention to for this one is that at this point in time, the suttas have not been written down. And so they are only sermons that are being remembered and then perhaps repeated to other people. So the idea of it being a scripture hasn't really congealed. We have scriptures in this time period, such as the Vedas, that people look to. These are written down texts that the language, the context, the words, the meaning is kind of locked in because the written word cannot be misremembered or changed on the fly in its telling. It's written down. But Buddhism is still an oral tradition at this time, and so nothing in Buddhism is sort of regarded by Buddhists to be scripture. It's regarded to be sermons given by somebody who knows a lot about how the world works. And so this is kind of like, in its own way, kind of undercutting and undermining the Brahmanical tradition and their reliance on these Vedas, which are kind of locked in and are rigid in what they say.
So the next criteria, nor upon surmise. So that's an odd way to phrase this. This is a spot where I suspect the translator was doing their best. But looking it up, I think conjecture might have been a better choice for what is trying to be said here. Either way, the words surmise and conjecture both include insufficient evidence by their definitions. So if you don't have enough evidence, don't regard a thing as totally true. This is a perfectly reasonable statement. Yeah, you have to have the evidence before you can make your conclusion completely.
This one is interesting to see, especially in the context of Buddhism, because the Buddha claims in a lot of different texts that he himself is walking, living, breathing evidence of the truth of what he's always saying. And what I mean by that is whenever he's preaching the Dharma, he's preaching enlightenment, he's preaching Buddhahood, he's kind of sometimes relying back on, yeah, and look at me. This is true because I'm enlightened, I'm a Buddha, the Dharma is true, and it's caused me to have all of these powers and to be this very enlightened individual and to, be the most revered among two-legged creatures and to be the Tathagata and all of that stuff. And so it's not an evidence-based argument in the sense that like a modern Western academic paper is. It's more like a reliance on evidence that, it might fall into our modern definition of circular reasoning, but it's true because I'm the Buddha and I'm saying it because it's true, and it's true because I'm the Buddha because I'm saying it, and on it goes. So he is presenting himself as being evidence for his claims in a lot of cases, but then as more people become enlightened, they too become their own evidence. So he doesn't have to always just say, and this is true because look at me, I'm this big time enlightened guy. He can then sometimes say, and look at Manjushri, and look at Shariputra, and look at all of my disciples. They also have become these very highly revered, highly enlightened people, and they still have a way to go sometimes. But, this is true because you can see us living it and living the benefits of it.
Right. Within the context of the suttas, the Buddha is correct. That is just part of the rules of the way these go. And so within its own context, what the Buddha says doesn't fall on this rule because he can provide his own evidence by a display of his powers, a display of his intelligence, etc. He can back up his claims inside the sutras. That falls apart once we step out of that context, but we're talking about the Kālāma Sutta right now. So within the context, this doesn't really harm his point at any spot because he has evidence, so it's not conjecture.
Exactly, yeah.
The next one, nor upon an axiom. So don't accept things presented as self-evident truths. Outside of mathematics, I strongly agree. There are so few things that are that kind of self-evident, that kind of axiomatic, that everything put in those terms should be questioned and examined. It is not enough for someone to say this is self-evident.
I think that another important aspect of this one is that it's been translated as axiom with the meaning of self-evident truth, but it is in the original text likely pointing to what we might call gnosis, spelled with a Gnosis. This is a Christian word that really reflects holy knowledge or esoteric knowledge gained in Christianity and experiences with God and all of that. But we can broaden the definition to include these things that are sort of mystical experiences or the sudden revelation that comes from concerted practice or from repeated study or things like that. And he's saying that the Brahmanical traditions are based on these self-evident truths that come out of study of the Vedas and study of and practice of like asceticism and following, the Varna Ashrama Dharma of Hinduism that we've talked about before. And he's saying that then Buddhism, or the Dharma in Buddhism, is not an axiom, is not a self-evident truth, because you don't have to rely on the Brahmin caste in order to access it, as you do in Hinduism. You can find the Dharma yourself through your own practice, your own investigation, however that looks. And then he's also saying that you don't have to rely on scriptures, and you don't have to rely on people who say the same things over and over again, and you don't have to rely on rumors, and you don't have to rely on any of these other things that we've been negating so far. You can find the Dharma and be illiterate. You can find the Dharma and be entirely isolated and entirely singular throughout your whole life without ever meeting any other people or hearing anything spread verbally or textually. And so this is kind of how he would say that, Brahmanical traditions are axiomatic. Buddhism, the Dharma, is not.
So the next one, nor upon specious reasoning. So the word specious does the heavy lifting here. The word means superficially pleasing but lacking real merit. So don't believe something just because it sounds nice. A ugly truth is better than a pretty lie.
Nothing much more to say there. I think that that's true as well.
Next one, nor upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over. So this is an interesting one, and it's a long-winded way of saying thinking about something for a long time doesn't necessarily get you to a useful answer. It is entirely possible to drill down on a topic in your head and still make no actual progress. And that's true. I've experienced this specifically before. Like, putting extra thought into it doesn't necessarily get you closer to an answer. Sometimes you're not getting anywhere.
Absolutely. And, I want to briefly hold this part right up next to the Tavijja Sutta, which we read and discussed last. And the Buddha here kind of thinks that the Brahmins are up to some very willful ignorance, in the sense that they are pondering these ideas for a very long time, and they think that they have come to very interesting and very true and very important and very monumentous conclusions about them, but they are kind of ignoring, either consciously or unconsciously, the holes in the reasoning and the holes in the logic that got them there. And the Tavijja Sutta outlines those very well and very systematically. You see this sort of discussion about okay, have they seen anybody reach this ideal called Brahman? Has anybody in the Brahmin caste reached Brahman and told you about it? Do they share this same nature with Brahman, etc., etc., etc.? And the implication is just simply that they are thinking a lot and talking a lot about this idea of Brahman, and they're referring back and forth to the Vedas to explain what it means and how to get there and all that stuff. But in the end, they are ignoring the holes that make that an impossible or a dead-end way of thinking. And so the Buddha then here says, don't listen to that, because it's an incomplete argument, it doesn't get you anywhere, and it's not reliable as an epistemology.
So the next one is nor upon another's seeming ability. I think the intention here is to direct readers to question both authority and expertise. And this is another one where a single word is doing some heavy lifting. Seeming here is a very important stipulation, and the Buddha evades damaging his position here with this rule because, from the perspective of everyone involved in the sutta, his expertise is genuine, not seeming. So, again, within the context that this is being said, by adding the modifier seeming, he is able to exclude himself from this criticism.
In a television show that I watch, one of my favorite jokes, it's a comedy show, and one of my favorite jokes they do is one character is introducing himself, and at the end of introducing himself, he says, "And I can levitate." And the other character is like, "Really? Well, can I see it?" And the first guy is like, "No, not right now." And so it's exactly a case of seeming ability. He's like, "I can levitate, and here's the reasons why I can levitate." But you don't ever see him levitate. And so you kind of have to doubt everything that he's saying as a result of that. And so as modern readers, yes, we would look at the events of the Lotus Sutta or of the other Mahayana sutras where the Buddha does all of these things that are seemingly impossible, like turning the firmament and turning the sky into these umbrellas or into a visualization of the 10 realms or of infinite Buddha realms, or all of these kind of trippy things that we see. Yeah, we doubt those things because we don't think people can do those things in our modern context. But again, like Docs was saying, in the context of the sutta, these are things that he can do and show and prove himself with immediately, right? He says, "I can levitate," and then he levitates. Or he just levitates and doesn't say anything about it. Or at least he says, the reason I can levitate is because of the powers afforded to me by the Dharma, right? So he, again, has this genuine expertise. And so it's important to not rely on seeming ability, find proof, find evidence.
The final one is, nor upon the consideration, the monk is our teacher. So don't just do what your teacher says, don't just follow what leaders tell you is true. Like, that's a good lesson. 8-year-old me needed to hear that.
Absolutely, yeah. And even though there is a huge ecumenical structure in Buddhism now, where there's monks and masters and students and monks of different ranks and all that stuff, back in this time period, everything was kind of democratized in the sense that there was the Buddha who had done this thing, and then there were people of fairly equal rank all around him who were listening to him talk about how to do this thing. And he encourages them, like, if you have doubts, here's what you can do. If you don't believe me, then you either have to practice at trying to believe me and changing your belief system, or you're welcome to leave. And it's not a big deal. I'm not going to like hold any ill will towards you just because you don't believe me and you leave. I think that ultimately you won't be reborn as a Buddha or Bodhisattva ever, or for a very long time, and you'll be suffering for a very long time if you don't believe me. But it's not like, I think that you're violating my authority. It's more a sense of like, I think that your way of living is ultimately like not great, but it's okay. You'll come to me if or when you're ready. And so that's kind of the power structure that we're looking at here, even though it's kind of developed and complicated throughout history. And in that respect, I think that this is kind of, again, another shot at Brahmanical traditions, but I also think that it is like, don't rely on power and authority. Just like whenever we were talking about not relying on seeming ability, don't rely on the fact that somebody has attained rank and you haven't. That doesn't necessarily mean that they know more.
So ultimately, I am on board with this list. This is a good set of recommendations for how to evaluate information just in general, not just religious information. So I want to switch focus for just a moment back to the Bhikkhu Sujato translation that I first read, because it would lead to a very different discussion. So it reads, quote, "Please, Kālāmas, don't go by oral transmission, don't go by lineage, don't go by testament, don't go by canonical authority, don't rely on logic, don't rely on inference, Don't go by reasoned train of thought. Don't go by the acceptance of a view after deliberation. Don't go by the appearance of competence. And don't think the ascetic is our respected teacher. So there are a lot of points that are going to be the same, but there would also be some points that would be a little different in the breakdown. And don't want to go into that because we would be here all day for a very different discussion, but it's interesting to see these two translations next to each other, how differently they are interpreting the same words.
Very fascinating, yeah. And I think that I would honestly probably show a preference for the one that we just read and listened to when it comes to specifically this list of criteria for rejection, because there's some words in here that are a little bit anachronistic. And while that's useful for communicating meaning, it's not useful for being accurate to what the original text says. I'm thinking in particular of the word logic.
Yeah, that one stood out to me a lot as well.
Yeah, and by reasoned train of thought, reason here is also doing some anachronistic work. Logic and reasoning are these very historically recent sort of developments in the Western mindset that wouldn't have existed in the same form back in the time that these texts were authored. And so it's an interesting choice to try and convey the same idea with these words that have a discrepancy or a gap between what's written and what is meant.
Yeah, translation, as we have said before, is interpretation, and there's no perfect way to do it. So after that, we go through the 3 poisons, which we've seen before. Don't really need to say much there, I think. So the next part where I would have us consider is the criterion for acceptance. So we just talked about rejection. Now let's discuss what is accepted. So, quote, Kālāmas, when you yourself know these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness, enter on and abide in them. So this is a much more subjective list of criteria. These things are praised by the wise. Well, you have to define who is wise in that case. These things are not blamable. That's potentially focused on a single person, and that's a lot more subjective. Undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness. That can change based on who's benefiting and who is not, or even what you think benefit means. These are all the things that are clear in the context of a sutta, because, the Buddha's there, and definitionally everything he says does meet this criteria, but then you step outside of the sutta and go, wait, is this person wise, or do they just seem wise? And it's a lot harder to say what you should do than it is to say what you shouldn't do, at least in this case.
I think that this particular section hit you exactly as it was intended to hit readers and hit the audience of the sermon back in its time period, because it gives you something to work with, which is this subjective experience of that which is good, not blamable, praised by the wise. It gives you sort of your free rein to define these things and to look to these things as guidestones. But at the same time, it gives you all these questions. What is good? What is not blamable? What things are praised by the wise, and who are the wise? Undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness. What is the benefit? Who is benefiting? What are the things that lead to these benefits and this happiness? And then the Buddha would then come back to you with answers. So it gives you like a nugget to start with, and then once you have turned that nugget over and thought about it, you suddenly have all these questions that draw you back to the Buddha himself, back to the sermons that he preaches. And if it doesn't draw you back and you think, oh, that's good, that's enough, then he's at least told you something that's not going to motivate you to go do something evil. He's going to have said, go do something good. Go do something for which you cannot be blamed. Go do something that will be praised by people that you believe to be wise. go do something that leads to benefit and happiness, whether it's for yourself, for others, or both. So it's a very interesting way to draw people in, but also to leave them with something that is in its own way sort of neutral.
Yeah, it's these criteria kind of give the reader some homework to do to figure out what each of those qualifications actually means.
Exactly. And when you start to do that homework, you're more likely to go back to the Buddha and start asking the important questions and listening to what he's got to say.
So next we talk about the 4 Brahma Viharas again. And we've talked about these elsewhere, so I don't think we need to go digging too deeply into those again. I will say I think it is an interesting choice the Buddha makes to use the Brahma Viharas as the entry point for this specific audience, the Kālāmas. The Brahma Viharas come up in Hindu texts as well, as I understand it, and this audience, I would assume, is responding to monks and Brahmins who potentially share these values. So this is the Buddha potentially skillfully meeting his audience where they are.
Exactly, yeah. The other place where we saw this recently was the Tavijja Sutta again, and he was saying to the characters in the Tavijja Sutta that Buddhism leads to the 4 Brahma Viharas and past them even to better and bigger things. And so he was playing on the fact that those people knew what the Brahma Viharas were and knew their benefits or had invested in their benefits to where they were like, yeah, this is a desirable state of being, a desirable thing to practice towards, a desirable thing to do. And he was saying Buddhism does it better, whereas Brahmanism doesn't get you all the way there. Brahmanism may sort of get you to a stagnant place where you're in one, or where you have fleeting experiences of them, or it might not get you there at all and completely miss the mark. And Buddhism is sort of designed around these 4 states. And I think that it is interesting that it's used for this audience, but it is kind of like the most entry level formulation of the benefits of the Dharma that you can give without falling victim to any of the things that he says to reject information based off of, which has to do with like, let me preach to you my Dharma right here, right now. Instead of saying that, he could just say, you know, your 4 Brahma Viharas, we have those too, and we do them very well. Instead of preaching the 4 Noble Truths and preaching meditation and loving kindness, compassion, and the reasons for all that stuff, and rebirth, reincarnation, and non-self and emptiness, he could just say, if you want compassion, if you want equanimity, if you want rapturous joy with others, then Buddhism's got that for you, right? And so it's kind of like a shorthand. You can think of it similarly to how Abrahamic religions and different denominations in Abrahamic religions all talk about salvation, but they all have very different ways of describing what it is, what it means, and how to get there. So he's almost like saying, Buddhism also offers salvation, and here's why our salvation is better, truer, more beneficial, etc., etc.
So finally, we get to the 4 solaces. So this has the same flavor from my Western understanding as Pascal's wager, but it has different shapes and different results in a few aspects. But the basic idea here is that accepting and dwelling within the Brahma Viharas doesn't really have a downside and has a potentially tremendous benefit. So even if evil deeds do not lead to evil results, by committing to meritorious deeds and results, I haven't really lost anything, even if my reasons for getting there turned out to be inaccurate. So it's just, I lose nothing from doing this, and I potentially gain tremendously from it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's another reason why he's using the 4 Brahma Viharas, is so that he can say to his audience, like, if you just pursue these 4 things, whether you do so by means of my Dharma or Brahmanism or anything like that, you're in good shape. You're overall in good shape, whether you are what we would now define as a Buddhist or not. you can pursue these things and the benefit is either tremendous or the loss is negligible. So then in that case, that's another sort of argument for like why his system works. He's like, it works even if you don't do it. It works if you don't do the system how I present doing the system. It's ultimately beneficial because the Brahmaviharas are kind of universally good and their opposite is kind of universally bad, right? I mean, I think that we can all agree that compassion and loving kindness and rapturous joy and equanimity, these are, in terms of the human condition, pretty universally good things to exist in and to live in and to experience. And so he says, even if you don't pursue enlightenment and Buddhahood in the way that I present it, pursuing those things will still leave you in pretty good shape.
And with all of that done, we come to kind of a conclusion of think about it yourself. This is overall a call for the listener to judge things by their results and rely on your own judgment rather than accepting judgment that has been given by others that are either more numerous or considered higher authorities on the subject. Like, no, the onus is still on the listener in this case.
Exactly, yeah. And according to the text itself, everybody is convinced and they immediately pledge themselves as lay followers of the Buddha, and they take the three treasures, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and they're suddenly sort of yoked to the Buddha's Dharma for life and for the many lives afterward. So the sutta concludes with everyone there being convinced and throwing in their lot with him and not with any of the other guys who pass through town and say stuff about how to reach awakening, liberation, enlightenment, whatever else they talk about. Instead, they throw in with the Buddha, who says, don't listen to people who do these things, rely on this kind of stuff. And if you rely on these 4 Brahmaviharas as your guide stones, then you'll be in good shape.
Yeah, this is a Buddhist sutta, so of course the Buddha wins in the end, and that's kind of just part of the format at this point.
Absolutely, and it'll continue to be the format we see throughout the Pali Canon when it comes to any kind of dialogues that engage with Brahmanical traditions. We've read several Pali Canon texts so far, and in each one, we kind of have this victory moment. And you'll see that it's very common in these Pali Canon texts, more so than the Mahayana texts, that there's direct engagement with this Brahmanical tradition. The Mahayana texts are usually looking down on what they are calling Hinayana, what we would now call Theravada, but these Pali Canon texts are looking down on the Brahmins and the people we would now define as Hindu. And so in that case, there's always going to be this sort of like, and then everybody was convinced, or and then everybody became more enlightened at the end, or and then everybody left behind their bad ways and pursued the Buddha's good ways. That's pretty much a constant in how these texts work.
And that brings us to the end, at least by my evaluation. Were there any points I missed that you want to talk about?
No, that takes care of it for me.
All right. Yeah, so this has been the Kālāma Sutta. I really like this one. It might be, like, if I were telling somebody what order to read suttas in, I think this would be number 3. The first sutta is the first sutta, and then I would say the Parinibbana Sutta would be the second one to read, and then this one kind of allows the reader to come to their own conclusions for everything that comes after.
I think so. Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think that for me, it would still be third, but I would have the first sutta as first, and instead of the Parinibbana Sutta as the second, I think that I might change that one out with something that describes non-self or emptiness in some kind of way. And the Parinibbana Sutta does that as well, but, I think that maybe I would go for the Diamond Sutra.
That makes sense.
Or maybe I would go for a Buddha nature sutta. I actually haven't thought about that very much, and so whenever we come back around on another sutta, maybe I'll have kind of a first set that I could think of.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that first set if it comes up. Otherwise, I look forward to our next sutta episode. So that was the Kālāma Sutta. Anything else to add to it, Nick?
Nope, I'm all good. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.
Hi, Nick here. Thanks so much again for listening to Bright on Buddhism. If you like our show and you'd like to support us, we ask instead that you take that money that you would use for us and give it to somebody who needs it a little more. This December, the Pacific Northwest region has been experiencing atmospheric river events causing historic flooding. This is causing damage to infrastructure, people being displaced from their homes, and, even in some extreme cases, loss of life. So, please consider donating to Auburn Mutual Aid. That's a good place to start. Your monetary donation can support Auburn Mutual Aid as they try to distribute culturally relevant hot meals to evacuated families as they stay with loved ones, and also grocery gift cards to families who are coming home to their evacuated homes. If you have material goods to donate, please donate them directly to Ray of Hope. The links for all of these charities can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.